Now, in war, either someone wins or someone loses. And as far as human history is concerned, talk about narratives, talk about stories, the victors always write history. This story is one of those. Welcome to No Ball IQ. Won't wait much time for the intro, let's get going with the video. This history begins in January 1949. At that time, Hungary was under Soviet occupation and was gradually being turned into a communist satellite state. During that harsh January winter, a 21-year-old footballer named Laszlo Kubala disguises himself as a Russian soldier, hides at the back of a truck, and leaves Hungary. A year later, in January 1950, Kubala, along with his coach and brother-in-law, started his own team. His team is composed of refugees fleeing Eastern Europe just like him. They named the team Jugaria. In the summer of 1950, this team played against España Industrial, a team of the Spanish Federation, and even Real Madrid in a series of friendly games. During these games, of course, all eyes are on Kubala. At a single glance, everyone knew that he was the best footballer in Europe at the time. Real Madrid also watched him very closely. And one very important person, Josep Samitier, who was Barcelona's coach and chief scout at that time, also took notice. After a very weird, murky transfer saga, Kubala joined FC Barcelona on June 15, 1950. Kubala, however, was under a FIFA ban at that time, due to accusations of contract breach, leaving Hungary without permission, and failing to complete military service. He couldn't play in the 1950-51 season. So Kubala's first season for Barca was 1951-52, in which he scored 26 goals in 19 games, setting all of Europe on fire. That season proved to be the most successful in the club's history up to that point. Barcelona, with players like Kubala, Eduardo Manchon, Joan Segara, Cesar Rodriguez, and others, and with Ferdinand Dalcic as coach, won 5 trophies that year. Kubala had a very big hand in this success. A very important figure in Real Madrid's history said this about Kubala: you couldn't knock him over with a cannonball. But fate is interesting, because a cannonball couldn't knock Kubala over, but an illness could. And the story was only just beginning. Now, a very important bit of this story. In November 1948, backtracking a bit, football players in Argentina went on strike. The reason was the huge disparity between club revenues and players' salaries. Around the same time, in Colombia, a conflict was brewing between the Colombian League and its football federation. What happens is that the Colombian Federation becomes disaffiliated from FIFA. Now, club owners and the clubs themselves can operate without any set global rules. Essentially, they were now operating under a pirate flag in football. This is where things really start to get crazy. During this time, a 23-year-old Alfredo Di Stéfano, along with 56 other players, leaves Argentina for Colombia to try his luck. Di Stéfano is signed by Millonarios, a Colombian team, which was chaired by Alfonso Sr. As the dispute in Colombia continued, FIFA reacted by expelling the Colombian Football Federation from its organization. This meant the rest of the world was banned from playing any friendlies with clubs from the Colombian League. 3 years later, in 1951, a resolution was signed to settle this dispute between the Colombian Football Federation and FIFA, known as the Lima Pact. This agreement stipulated that the runaway players would remain the property of the Colombian clubs where they were playing until the end of their current contracts, after which the ownership would revert to their original clubs. With that settled, Colombian clubs were now allowed to play friendlies with the rest of the world again, and this allowed Millonarios to go on a tour of Europe in March 1952. During this tour, they participated in the main event at Real Madrid's 50th anniversary celebrations. A triangular tournament was organized between Real Madrid, Norrköping, a Swedish club, and Millonarios, which Millonarios went on to win, and Di Stéfano dazzled everyone. At that time, Di Stéfano was officially a player of the Colombian League, belonging to Millonarios, until October 15, 1954, with the commitment that he would return to his original club, River Plate in Argentina, on January 1, 1955. But fate had something else in store for Barcelona. In September 1952, Kubala was diagnosed with an infectious lung disease, specifically tuberculosis. The prognosis was very pessimistic. Doctors declared that Kubala would not be fit for sports anymore. And because everyone at Barcelona was so pessimistic, they all believed that Kubala's career would soon be over. At that time, Barcelona's president, Enrique Martí Coureto, gave an order to chief scout Josep Samitier: find me the next gem of world football. Barcelona needed to maintain their supremacy in Spanish football, so Josep Samitier set out to find, well, the next pearl of world football. By the 1950 to 53 period, Barcelona had won 4 La Liga titles and 11 Copa del Rey, then known as Copa Generalissimo. Barcelona had also won the regional Catalan championship 23 times, as well as multiple other trophies like the Latin Cup and the Copa Eva Duarte. In summary, by 1953, Barcelona had about 25 plus major honors in their history. Real Madrid, on the other hand, was trailing a bit behind. They had won La Liga only 3 times, had 6 Copa del Rey titles, about 5 regional titles, and 1 Latin Cup up to that time. In summary, by 1953, Real Madrid had roughly 15 to 20 major trophies. Up until here, Barca was clearly the dominant club in terms of performance. Barcelona's technical secretary and sporting director at that time looked at various options and got in contact with Alfredo Di Stéfano. Di Stéfano at that time was aware of Barca's situation and sympathetic to Kubala's plight. He was open to listening to Barcelona's offer. Sometime later, President Enrique Martí Carreto himself went to Buenos Aires to negotiate a deal with River Plate, Di Stéfano's original club in Argentina, for the transfer of the Argentine forward for a fee of around 4 million pesetas. Meanwhile, in the spring of 1953, Kubala made a miraculous recovery from his tuberculosis infection and returned to the field. Barcelona were crowned league champions on May 3, 1953, and around that time, they had reached a verbal agreement with Di Stéfano. Josep Samitier, acting on behalf of the club, welcomed Di Stéfano and his family at Barajas Airport in Madrid on May 22, 1953. On that day, the Argentine footballer Alfredo Di Stéfano was already on Spanish soil, and he soon visited Barcelona's stadium and even met Kubala in person. At this time, Alfonso Sr., the president of Millonarios, was keeping a close eye on this whole operation going on between Barcelona and River Plate. After all, Di Stéfano was under contract with Millonarios until the end of 1954. Millonarios notified FIFA about Barcelona's actions. Since Di Stéfano was officially a Millonarios player until December 31, 1954, and would only return to River Plate in January 1955, the transfer rights that Barcelona had supposedly purchased from River Plate would not be valid until that date. Now, because Kubala's transfer in 1950 had also been a bit murky, FIFA had been monitoring Barcelona's dealings closely, and FIFA quickly informed the Spanish Federation that Di Stéfano would not be allowed to play for FC Barcelona under these circumstances. By July 1953, the situation had become very tense. Barcelona's president, Enrique Martí Carreto, said he would take advantage of Barcelona's off-season tour to the Americas from July 8th to August 7th to resolve the Di Stéfano case by negotiating directly with the president of Millonarios. During this tour, Carreto met Alfonso Sr. in Caracas. He learned that Sr.'s asking price for Di Stéfano was $27,000, an amount Carreto felt was exorbitant. President Martí Carreto and Barca's secretary, José Perla, and a lawyer named Trias Fargas met with Sr. at the Hotel El Pinar in Caracas. They announced that Barcelona had rejected Millonarios' proposal to play a friendly in Bogotá, hoping that by refusing, they could pressure Millonarios and use the Catalan team's tour in the Americas to lower Di Stéfano's price. On August 4, 1953, after the failed negotiations with Millonarios, a statement was published in the Spanish press stating that Barcelona was willing to keep Di Stéfano out of football for a full season if necessary. They reasoned the Millonarios would have to eventually reduce their demands. If Martí Carreto had just paid the $27,000 to Millonarios, perhaps Di Stéfano would have become a Barcelona player. But, as someone once said, when doom is about to befall a man, the first thing he loses is his judgment. Because this wasn't Martí Carreto's only mistake. On August 9, 1953, Josep Samitier resigned from Barcelona. Samitier was one of the most powerful and competent technical secretaries in Spanish football at the time. He was the man who had made Kubala's impossible signing possible for Barcelona. But Martí Carreto could not reach a financial agreement to renew Samitier's contract, and so Samitier left the club. He was also the one person who had a respectful, trust-based relationship with Alfredo Di Stéfano. Now, Samitier was gone from Barcelona. Around the same time, Alfonso Sr. began talks with Real Madrid. The senior had good relations with Real Madrid's management. Álvaro Bustamante, a vice president of Real Madrid, went to the club president, Santiago Bernabéu, and strongly urged Real Madrid to sign this player. And guess what happens? Real Madrid agrees. Real Madrid buys Di Stéfano's rights for $27,000.
Real Madrid sends a club director, Raimundo Saporta, to Bogotá to deliver the payment to Millonarios and finalize that deal. After that, Saporta traveled back to Spain. In Madrid, at the Hotel Regina, he met with Di Stéfano and paid him his first pesetas as a Real Madrid player. And so the story was nearing its conclusion. Barcelona could not register Di Stéfano with the Spanish Football Federation until Real Madrid transferred their newly acquired rights to Barcelona. And Real Madrid could not register Di Stéfano until they obtained approval from River Plate, who had sold their share to Barcelona. In other words, neither club could unilaterally complete the registration. They were stuck in a stalemate. Both Barcelona and Real Madrid now had to reach an agreement. So they turned to FIFA for mediation. During this period, Barcelona's board made one more attempt to salvage the situation. On August 26, 1953, Barcelona's vice president, Narcís de Carreras, met with Alfonso Sr. Alfonso Sr., however, plainly told Carreras that all the financial agreements were already finalized in Real Madrid's favor, and that there was no longer any room for Barcelona to obtain Di Stéfano's rights. Enrique Martí Carreto's saga didn't end there. In a fit of desperation and anger, Martí Carreto lost his temper. In this state, he approached Juventus in Italy with an outrageous proposal, offering to sell Barcelona's share of Di Stéfano's rights to Juventus. But because Martí did this unilaterally, without consulting Di Stéfano or probably even his own board, Di Stéfano grew furious. Nobody had approached him about any of this. Juventus, upon learning of the complications and seeing that FIFA's approval was lacking, immediately backed off and canceled any such idea. Frustrated and angry, Enrique Martí then went back to River Plate, asking to cancel Barcelona's agreement with them and demanding a full refund of all the money Barcelona had paid for Di Stéfano. The case was now getting even messier and more convoluted, so much so that FIFA had to intervene again. Enrique Martí and Barcelona's board understood that only FIFA could provide a resolution at this point.
FIFA appointed Muñoz Calero, a former president of the Spanish Football Federation and a FIFA committee member, to mediate this entire mess. He came up with a rather peculiar solution. Di Stéfano would play for Real Madrid in the seasons 1953-54 and 1955-56, and play for Barcelona in the seasons 1954-55 and 1956-57. After those 4 seasons, the two clubs would have to meet again and decide where Di Stéfano would continue beyond that. FIFA basically proposed splitting the players' services between the two clubs in alternate years to keep everyone happy, like cutting an apple in half. However, this solution satisfied nobody at Barcelona. Neither the club members nor the board liked this idea at all. By this point, Enrique Martí Carreto had had enough of the whole fiasco. On September 22, 1953, he submitted his official resignation as president of FC Barcelona. And amazingly, the very next day, on September 23, 1953, Alfredo Di Stéfano made his debut for Real Madrid. Di Stéfano's official debut was against a team named AS Nancy from France. Real Madrid lost that game 4-2, and Di Stéfano failed to dazzle anyone on his debut. By October 1953, the story was still shaky. Di Stéfano's start at Real Madrid had been quiet. In fact, having been out of competitive action for months during the dispute, Di Stéfano had even gained some weight and was not yet at peak fitness. On the other hand, Barcelona was doing well. Kubala had miraculously recovered from his illness. Barcelona were the reigning league champions and Copa Generalissimo, King's Cup holders. And they went on to win the league again in the 1953-54 season. In fact, Barcelona at this point was so confident that on October 14, 1953, only 5 games into the new league season, they abandoned all rights of Di Stéfano. The two clubs sat together and signed an agreement that all of Di Stéfano's rights would belong to Real Madrid alone. On October 23, 1953, that agreement was formalized. Real Madrid would pay Barcelona double the amount Barcelona had paid to River Plate for Di Stéfano's transfer. The long tug-of-war over Di Stéfano was finally over. Because this case was so convoluted, in 1954, writer Rafael Lamelas published a book titled Di Stéfano Tells His Life. In this book, the player, Di Stéfano, shares the story of his transfer saga. He says that Real Madrid had been interested in him even before Barcelona. According to him, Barcelona started to back out of the deal because they thought guaranteeing all the conditions was too difficult, and perhaps they felt they didn't really need his help after all, especially with Kubala recovering. In fact, not long after, some negative reports about Di Stéfano began appearing from Barcelona's side. Barcelona's coach, Ferdinand Dauchik himself, openly stated that signing Di Stéfano was not that important and that the team needed strengthening in other areas instead. Now, the history between Barcelona and Real Madrid has always been a bit dirty, with a lot of unsavory actions even before this incident. But to truly discover the truth of this story, we have to jump ahead to 2017. In 2017, a document came to light, a document that had been signed between Barcelona and River Plate back in 1953. The significant thing about this document is that it was about the signing of Di Stéfano, and it contains a very important Clause 4. Clause 4 essentially says, this entire agreement is subject to the player Di Stéfano actually, physically, legally, and effectively joining Barcelona before the 26th of an upcoming month, having resolved any difficulties that may arise from his playing in Colombia. If these conditions are not met, the agreement will be terminated. This statement is mind-blowing because it shows that both Barcelona and River Plate knew that the transfer could fall through if no agreement was reached with Millonarios. Despite knowing this, Enrique Martí failed to secure an agreement with Millonarios. Now, that was the agreement between the clubs. Importantly, no document was ever found of any agreement between Barcelona and Millonarios, and also no official document was found that was signed by Alfredo Di Stéfano with Barcelona. Di Stéfano never actually signed an official contract with FC Barcelona. He had only received some unofficial documents from them. The only official contract he ultimately signed was with Real Madrid.
Now, let's rewind a bit to August 24th, 1953.
A new legal provision was passed by the National Sports Delegation in Spain. This new rule prohibited any foreign player from playing football in Spain. Now, the timing was funny because this law was passed right when Barcelona and Real Madrid were fighting over Di Stéfano's signing. The truth is, by the time this law came into effect, Di Stéfano had already arrived in Barcelona. Di Stéfano didn't debut for Barcelona because this law blocked it. However, since Barcelona's Enrique Martí had handled things clumsily and FIFA had to intervene, in September 1953, both Barcelona and Real Madrid jointly submitted an appeal. They argued that they had completed all the negotiations and paperwork for Di Stéfano before the law came into effect. Other La Liga clubs joined this appeal as well, seeking clearance for their own foreign signings that summer. On September 15, 1953, Real Madrid and Barcelona actually signed an agreement to share the player. But as mentioned before in this video, on October 23, 1953, Barcelona officially renounced all rights in favor of Real Madrid. We all know what happens next. This saga set the stage for the future. At that time, there were a few great clubs in Europe with the world's best footballers. Barcelona had more trophies than Real Madrid up to that point, but Di Stéfano ended up with Real Madrid, and he would soon help Real Madrid usher in a true era of European success. Now that completes my yapping quota for the day. But having said that, if you people ended up enjoying this deep dive into the crazy transfer saga of that period, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot. But on that note, I will see you guys some other day with a unique football proposition. Till then, take care, and peace out, and you don't forget to hit subscribe.